How's everybody doing? Good morning.
Guys, have a good break. Have you enjoyed the session so far? Well, this is going to be the most entertaining, right, Scott?
We'll see about that.
Well, we're going to do our best. Thank you for joining us, and I want to first thank you, Scott, too, for flying down here from. Wait, did you come from Nashville or New York?
I got out of Nashville pretty easily. Yeah.
Okay, good. So, I mean, for anyone in the nonprofit space, I like to refer to Scott as the Bono of nonprofits. I mean, his reputation precedes him. You really are a legend, Scott. I mean, I will say that when I made the pivot into philanthropy, almost immediately I kept hearing Scott Harrison's Charity Water. Hey, Brittany. Scott Harrison Charity Water, and I could not wait to finally meet you. And we had connected, I think, online a long time ago, but we really bonded a few years ago when I saw you speak at a conference in San Diego. So it's a pleasure to, I'm honored to call you a friend and to be here to interview you. So
Thanks, Todd.
I don't want to steal your thunder because you have such an incredible story, but for those of you that aren't familiar with Charity Water, it's a nonprofit founded in 20 years ago now, right? 2006?
Almost 20, yeah.
Happy anniversary. And it provides drinking water, safe drinking water to people in developing countries. And it's really one of the most trusted and admired nonprofits in the world. Well known for its 100% donation model, which definitely going to want you to talk about. That's a really big deal. And radical transparency, which is even more important today than ever before. And obviously you're a great storyteller, and excited to hear some of your stories. So with that, why don't we start with your story? How did you get into philanthropy to begin with?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm a very unlikely candidate to be on this stage or on any stages really having to do with philanthropy. I was a former club promoter in New York City. So my first career was running 40 different nightclubs from the age of 18 to 28. And that was really an act of rebellion against my conservative parents, who brought me up in the church, and I wasn't allowed to dance, and I wasn't allowed to swear or date girls. So I said, I'm going to teach them. I'm going to move to New York City and become the greatest club promoter in the world. I didn't get there, but I probably got to top 8 after 10 years. And to the dismay of my very faithful conservative Christian parents, I'm picking up all of the vices that come with the territory. When you have dinner at 10 and you go to the club at 3 and you come home at noon, good things don't always happen to you. And, slowly and then suddenly, I realized, oh my gosh, I've been at this for 10 years. I'm like the worst person I know all of a sudden. I mean, I party for a living. I sort of poison other people through alcohol and drugs, which are happening in the clubs. And I have come so far from the foundation of spirituality and morality that, my parents tried to instill in me. I mean, I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up so that I could help people. And at 28, I just had this radical opportunity to change my life. I said, 10 years in clubs, what would the opposite of that selfish, hedonistic sycophant look like? I thought, what if I volunteered for 1 year? Would I have anything to offer a humanitarian organization? Would I have anything to offer people in need? And I am a pretty radical guy, so I sold everything I owned. And I begin at 28 years old to apply to these famous charities that I have tangentially heard of. So I applied to Save the Children and Doctors Without Borders and World Vision and the Red Cross. It turns out, Todd, no one is looking for a nightclub promoter. So I'm denied by every organization that I applied to. And finally, this one organization writes me back and says, well, if you're willing to pay us $500 a month to volunteer, and if you're willing to go live in the poorest country in the world that has just come out of a 14-year war, Liberia, West Africa, I had never even heard of this country, then we'll take you. So I'm like, this is great. I mean, what is more opposite than spraying Cristal champagne from the DJ booth, over 500 people than going to the poorest country in the world with no electricity, no water, no sewage, no facilities at all, and seeing if I could be helpful. And the role that I signed up for, in some ways I wasn't even qualified to do. It was a kind of photojournalist for the mission. And I was a pretty good photographer and a pretty good writer, but they took me, and everything
And how
changed.
long was that experience?
Well, I signed up for a year, and what was interesting was the day. So I was living on a hospital ship. So this all took place on a 522-foot hospital ship, and it was a group of doctors and surgeons that would donate their vacation time, and they would sail this ship up and down the coast of Africa, and they would bring the best doctors to people who had no access. So we were going to be the first of any kind of intervention allowed into Liberia for a decade and a half to pick up the pieces. And my job was just to document everything that happened. And I remember I had this kind of moment where I'm like, all right, I have to quit the drinking and the smoking. And, I went out with a bang and then walked up the gangway of the ship. And there was something really symbolic about surrendering my passport and sailing away to a new life or a new chapter in my life. And that first week, I met this remarkable man who was the chief medical officer. His name was Dr. Gary Parker, and he was a surgeon in California, plastic surgeon. And like me, he had heard, there's this ship of doctors and surgeons, so he signed up for 3 months of duty. And I was told when I joined that first day, he had been there 21 years. So he fell so in love with this work and this mission, he never went back to his plastic surgery practice.
It's incredible.
So I wanted to know everything I could about him. And, I learned I was in over my head. I mean, I'd never experienced extreme poverty of any kind like this. And on the third day that we were there, we would have this patient screening, which the veterans on the ship would call the screaming. And what that was all of the sick people who had heard of the coming of the doctors would turn up on this one day to be triaged and seen. And if they were lucky, they would get a surgery card where they could come onto the ship and these world-class medical facilities. And we specialized in facial tumors, cleft lips, cleft palates, people who had been burned during the war, and so burn contractures and such. And I learned that the government had given us the soccer stadium, this kind of crumbling arena in the center of the city, to welcome the people that would come. And we had 1,500 surgery slots that we could hand out. And I'll never forget that third day on this mission, grabbing my cameras. It was 5 a.m, and I put on hospital scrubs, and I'm joining the medical team as we snake through the city to arrive at the stadium, and there's over 5,000 people in the parking lot. And it was such a pivotal moment for me, realizing, oh my gosh, we don't have enough doctors. Like, we're gonna send 3,000 sick people home. And I later learned in the next couple hours, many of those people had walked for more than a month. They had walked from Guinea, from Cote d'Ivoire, from Sierra Leone. The word had spread. They had come with their children, and they were too far back in the line and never got seen. So
That must have been really heartbreaking.
It was, and I remember Dr. Gary and one of the other doctors kind of took me aside and said, listen, the only way you're gonna survive is focus on the hope. You have to focus on the people we are gonna be able to help. And there was a boy, the first child, so my job that day was documenting all 1,500 people with massive deformities, with 6-pound tumors growing on their faces. And I had to document them for the medical library pre and post intervention. And there was this little boy named Alfred who was 14, and he was the first child I photographed. And I just remember he was terrified. He was suffocating to death on his own face as this tumor had taken over his tongue and his mouth. And Dr. Gary said, we're gonna be able to help him. And a couple days later, I remember scrubbing up and watching this 8.5-hour surgery as they carefully removed his tumor and put his face back together. And a couple weeks later, I got to drive him back to his village and watch this little boy who had been written off for dead, who people thought was cursed somehow spiritually, what would make this thing grow, welcomed back into
Yeah,
into
I've
the
experienced
village.
that in Africa. Whenever someone looks different or there's a health condition, they think it's from God.
Yeah. So I loved the work, and the
Yeah,
year turned into 2
how did-
years. So I
and
finished
how
that
did
1
this-
year.
And how did this bring you to charity water, though?
Well, the
Why
funny
didn't you
thing
go to
was,
medical school after this?
yeah, the cool thing was I actually had a big club list. So if you had ever come to one of my nightclubs for 10 years, I probably had your email and you were getting my emails, well, like it or not. So, there were some unsubscribes at first. Like people were like, a tumor, my gosh, I didn't ask for this. But I learned that if you told stories of people in need and how everyday people could help, in this case by sponsoring surgeries, people would. And I wound up raising hundreds of thousands of dollars just through my emails for future surgeries. So I think I realized in those 2 years, maybe the same skill of promoting, albeit promoting the wrong thing in nightclubs, and a kind of a life of debauchery, could actually be redirected and used to help people. So I had seen a lot over those 2 years. I lived in a leprosy colony for a period of time. I had seen just the remnants of war and its effects on children. But the one thing that I saw that it wasn't okay on my watch was I saw kids drinking dirty water. And as we would go into these villages, the children would walk into a swamp or a pond in the middle of the village, and they would bathe and they would drink water that I wouldn't give to a dog, not to an animal. And, for 10 years, Todd, I'd been selling Voss water, which we actually have back there, for $10 a bottle in my nightclubs. People wouldn't even open the water. They'd come into a club, they'd sit down, they'd order $250 of water and just let it sit there and drink, vodka and
Or they'd have one sip and then...
Or they have one sip and toss it. So there was something, first of all, with these doctors, we can't serve enough people. And then I learned half the country is drinking disgusting, contaminated, dirty water. And according to the World Health Organization, half of the disease in the country was waterborne. So I kind of feel like I've stumbled on the root cause of so much of this sickness. Millions of people drinking dirty water, half of the hospital beds in the country filled because people didn't have the most basic need for health. And I'm sharing these pictures with Dr. Gary, and at the end of the second year, he's like, why don't you go make this your problem? Why don't you go back home and try to bring clean water to everybody in the world? I was like, all right. I guess that sounds like
But your
a
parents
thing to
didn't
do.
even recognize you when you came back, right?
They were very happy. I mean, they were on the email list, so they saw the transformation for sure. But it was really that simple. It was, of all the things I'd seen, the one thing I thought I could do something about was try to bring clean water to every single person in the world. So the vision and the dream was that big. And at the time, there were 1 billion people drinking dirty water globally 20 years ago. So if you had met me, I would have told you, I'm going to try to bring clean water to 1 billion people and end the day, where a single human alive on planet Earth ever has to drink dirty water, or where any child is ever born into a village where they could poison themselves and die because they don't have their most basic need for health met.
It's incredible. So you came back and you started a nonprofit. Did you start it by yourself? Did you do it with friends?
Well, I didn't know anything about nonprofits, so I bought one of those dummies books, like the yellow, how to start a nonprofit for dummies. I'm like, okay, I'm going to need a board, and this thing is called a 501c3. So there was a lot of just learning. I think John Arnold was talking about reading. I was doing my version of reading and talking to other nonprofits. And the interesting thing is, because I didn't know anyone in the philanthropic space, I knew people who worked at Sephora and at MTV or VH1 or, at Goldman Sachs and went to nightclubs with their black cards. So I was just talking to everyday people about this mission. Hey, I'm going to try to bring clean water to everybody in the world. And they'd say, that sounds like a good idea, but I don't trust charities. And I would hear time and time again this cynicism, this skepticism when it came to giving their money, everyday people giving their money to charity. The USA Today had done a poll when I started, and they found 42% of Americans that they asked said that they didn't trust charities. NYU did a more recent study, found 70% of the people they asked believed charities wasted their money.
That's recent.
7 out of 10 people, NYU Wagner study. So I'm like, well, why are these people not trusting of charities? And the simple answer was because they don't know where their money goes. They just don't know where their money goes. And typically the money goes into one giant pot, and maybe it does a lot of things. So I thought, what if we could promise the public that any dollar, whether it was $1 or $10 or $10 million, would go directly to help people get clean water. And then in a separately audited bank account, somehow we would raise all of that nasty overhead from a group of people who believed that people were necessary, and an office and flights and phone bills and like the toner for the Epson copy machine. Somebody had to pay for that. But we would reach out to the public, to the cynic, and say, you don't need to pay for that. And then we realized that if we could make this model work, because money wasn't fungible, we could build proprietary technology that would track every single donation down to the final location. So if a child gave $6.12 from a lemonade stand, we could track all $6.12 to a village in Ethiopia and show the child a satellite image of the well or the water system that she contributed to and the other people that she shared that with. So those two things together, I think the idea of giving 100% of every public donation and then proving every single donation was so revolutionary at the time that we just grew like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it must have been really challenging to get donors to support the operational costs at first, right?
I mean, it still is.
Yeah.
You know, this year we'll raise about $100 million. We still have to go raise all of that overhead separately. So that still is kind of the existential, forever challenge of the organization, is finding people who believe in that. In the early days, it was harder.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a moment where we were about a year and a half in, and the 100% model was working so well that we had $881,000 in the water account, and we were about to go bankrupt in the overhead account. We had a couple weeks left of payroll. And the advice I was getting from friends was like, dude, just go borrow from the 900 Gs, make payroll, you got to pay your people, write an IOU and pay it back later. And I remember thinking, if we take 1 penny, if we borrow 1 penny of the money that we said is going directly to fund water projects, there's a crack in the foundation. Like, I wouldn't want to work here. Nobody's going to want to work at a place that does that. So at that moment, a year and a half in, I'm like, I've asked everybody I know for overhead. This is a stupid model. Maybe it works for billionaires who can endow their own overhead. So I start calling lawyers how to shut charity water down.
Oh, no.
And at that moment, I'm a person of faith. We're not a religious organization at all, but I remember praying with no faith, for some sort of miracle. And a complete stranger walked into our office, sat down with me. I thought the meeting went terribly. He was British, so he just didn't laugh at any of my jokes and didn't smile. And at the end of the meeting, he left, and a couple of days later, he wired $1 million into the overhead account. And we went from this insolvency moment to another year of runway. And then we started finding other people with that time. And today there's 146 families that pay the overhead on 3-year revolving cycles from $100,000 a year to $1 million a year. We call that The Well. And they've made it possible for millions of people to give, now over $1 billion.
Wow. Is that incredible or what? I hope we're all learning things here because, yeah, I mean, being able to underwrite the operating costs is essential to keeping the organization going.
And we don't preach that for others. If you're starting a charity today, I am not telling. In fact, I'm trying to talk you out of our model. What we believe is that people want to know where their money goes.
Yeah, that's the most important.
And donors are open to myriad value propositions. If I told you all right now that the biggest need was, let's go back to the copy machine. Our copy machine broke and it's $600 to fix it. You would all immediately come together with $600 to meet a need. Now, that's not a fun thing to pay for, but it's the not knowing that I think is still one of the challenges, the opacity that so many organizations operate with that just disconnects their donors from the impact of their dollars. And so much of the money we've tried to raise is from children, is from cynics and skeptics who are giving $100, and we need to create a meaning, a real tangible meaning for that $100.
Yep. So, well, Scott, let me ask you, I know people can go online and you send them photos and they can see where the well is that they've helped create or the project. Can donors go with you to actually see it in person as well?
So if you are a part of that overhead program, that is one of the perks. We take them and their children, and it's amazing. I mean, you heard from Rob, his first experience. He went to go visit a friend, and it turned out to be a $1 billion trip, for him as he caught the vision of conservation. And so we are hoping people catch that vision. And we hear stories of, people who are giving something and then they'll come on a trip with us and they'll, fly first class on Emirates back from Africa, land in London and just, write a $3 million check or a $5 million check because they've seen how far the money goes. They've seen the power of water. When we're doing these trips, we just get, Ben, my colleague at the back is our chief development officer. He's led more trips for me in the recent years. And we just get out of the way. We just kind of put our donors there and say, you ask the questions.
Yep. And what do these trips look like? How long are they?
5 days. Often a donor will go and do safari afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
They'll take their family somewhere else if they're already in Africa. We run them pretty hard. Time to get up. Let's go to a village without water. Let's go see a well being drilled. Let's go see a solar install happening. And it's we make the kids walk for water.
How often do these take place?
We do about 4 a year at this point.
And can people?
You can come, Todd.
I know. I'm thinking about it. I love it. I love Africa, and
it's really moving, to see because again, our biggest challenge is getting people to care about an issue that they have never experienced. So let me just say that, we tell our team there are 0 people in the world today who woke up, walked over to their refrigerator, pressed the lever and got their clean filtered water, brushed their teeth, took their long shower, maybe took a look at the pool or the golf course that they're living on and said, you know what? Gosh, I'm so blessed to have clean water in my life. Let me go find a water charity so that I can provide that to others. No one comes to us. 0 people come to us. So we have to go to them with this story. 700 million people don't have clean water. Water is the most basic need in human life, right? And we tell a story of how water means health and water impacts women and girls. And a third of the world's schools don't have water when we started. So imagine sending your kid to a school without water. Well, this is why girls drop out. So, water has all of these knock-on effects if you don't have it. But we have to tell that story. And then people are nodding their heads saying, yeah, I guess if you didn't have water, you're not doing well. You're not thriving. You cannot live without clean water. But, look, we'll spend almost $50 billion this year just in America on medical research. Well, how many of you have been affected by cancer? 100% of you, either personally or in your family or a friend or a coworker. Right? So it's very easy to raise money for ALS or Parkinson's or pancreatic cancer, which eventually took the life of my mom. How many of you have had to walk 8 hours for dirty water? How many women have been raped on a water walk through the village? How many people have held a 3-year-old in their arms who died of dehydration? Because the only way to cure dehydration is to rehydrate. And if you're giving them water, which is making them sick, they die of diarrhea. They die of dysentery, one of the leading causes of death around the world in young children. No one's experienced that. So that is the biggest challenge for an organization like ours, is to continue to find new ways to tell stories, to bring people into this, and then.
Well, I have a question. You've been doing it 20 years. You've been very successful. I think you've raised close to $1 billion so far, over $1 billion. For our friends that are in the nonprofit space in our audience, I'd love for you to share kind of some tips or tricks or, what's enabled you to be so successful in fundraising, and what can you share with them to, help them out and give them suggestions?
I mean, I think storytelling is really important. We connect to organizations through stories and not through data and statistics, right? 696 million people right now don't have clean water. None of you can picture 696 million anything, like units of anything. So, but a story of a 13-year-old girl who's walking 8 hours for water, who one day trips and falls at the end of her walk, spills her water, and hangs herself from a tree because she's in such despair, it is a different way to connect to that issue. Or a woman who got clean water for the first time at 55 years old in Uganda and told our team that she feels beautiful for the first time in her life because she can wash her face and her body and her clothes every day. And that previously she had been using all the water on her kids, right, as a sacrificial Ugandan mom, because that's what they do, she said. And they never use the water for themselves. They always put their families first, right? Those are ways of connecting people to true stories. And if I showed you a video of her speaking, or if I showed you a picture of the tree where they found a noose around a 13-year-old girl and a path next to it and a broken clay pot, it's a different way of getting people to connect. So I think storytelling is really important. The stories have to be true. They have to be visual. We've made over 1,000 videos at Charity Water. I think video is a language now, especially if you're younger. People are connecting more with that. And you've got to tell people where their money's going. You have to build the feedback loop.
You also have to get into the room where you're going to meet the donors. And how have you been able to do that? Well, you wrote a book.
I do this like 1,000 times. You just you're out there. I mean, when I started Charity Water, I had this lab. So all I had was 2 years of experience in Africa taking pictures. And I came back to New York City, and I would anybody that would meet with me, I would go to them and I would open up a laptop and I would click next. This is what I saw. This is the solution. And for $10,000, you can make this happen for a whole village of 300 people. 8 out of 10 people would say no. 2 would say yes. And then they'd say, you got to go meet my friend. And then you go meet the next 10. And then your odds are a little better.
You were
7 out of 10
like
say
salesman,
no. 6 out of 10
but
say
a charity salesman.
You're constantly promoting your cause, and if you're passionate about it,
and people feel your passion. They could tell, and I think that resonates.
I mean, I think anybody that has a cause has a passion for that cause, and I think people give to people more than causes. I mean, Nate, you're going to hear from later this afternoon. There's so many people that never really thought of this organization or this problem, and then they meet Jose Andre or they meet Nate, and they're like, well, this is a person on a mission. I want to help them achieve that mission. And feeding people, that sounds like a pretty good mission to align with. Giving humans clean water, that's...
And they also are trusting you, the person in front of them, that you're going to be a good steward of their donation.
You have to dot the I's and cross the T's, and you have to be...
And I think communication is key too. You must be, really good at following up with all your donors, and I know you share information about where the money went, but you got to stay in constant contact.
Yeah, and designing those systems. So we designed something that we call waterproof, where every single donation could be $1.42 gets a story and a final accountability for where the $1.42 went. So there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And we can do that across hundreds and hundreds of thousands of donors because we believed that would be important, and then we invested millions of dollars building out that technology and testing that technology and QAing that technology. So it's a value. Proof is a value of the organization.
Awesome. And I know you're working on a new campaign. Can you tell everyone about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're 20 years in, and I mean, honestly, I can't believe we've only raised $1 billion. So if you had ever told me that this is where we would be almost 20 years in, I would have said this is a fraction of what I've ever imagined. So in some circles, we're seen as successful. No one in our organization believes that. I mean, there's $500 billion sitting in donor advised funds right now. Like 20% of that gives every human clean water.
No, but
so
from an impact standpoint, you've impacted over 20 million
We've helped 20 million
lives,
people, but that's 1/35 of the problem solved. So I didn't get out of bed to solve 3.1% of the global problem. This is, I hope that we're in the top of the second inning of the game, of the impact, and that the best is yet to come. So one initiative that I'm really excited about is we started just going to high net worth and ultra high net worths and foundations and saying, listen, why don't you raise your hand and take 1 million people on? So why don't you give 1 million people clean water? It's about $50 million, depending on the countries. And we said, we'll let you pick your countries. We have 29 countries. If you want to do one country in Africa, 10, you want to Africa, India, Southeast Asia, you want to build a global portfolio, we'll let you choose that. But at the end of this journey, as a part of your philanthropic legacy, you get to tell your kids and your grandkids, you know what, I did a lot of stuff. I supported the arts. I built that wing at my alma mater, contributed to medical research. I also gave 1 million humans the most basic need for life. I gave them water. So we've had some success. There was I was telling you the story backstage. There was a entrepreneur, 70-year-old entrepreneur from Wisconsin. I was having dinner with him, and he owns a series of hotels and conference centers. And he offered me $1 million at dinner. He said, I'm going to build 100 water projects. And I said, then at the end of the dinner, he starts telling me about his new construction project. And it's this $900 million hotel, and it's going to be gorgeous. And he's telling me how he financed it. And I just said, it just seems to me you're thinking so expansively about your business and maybe a little small about your philanthropy. And he goes, well, how should I be thinking? I said, Todd, instead of $1 million, how about 1 million people? And 3 days later, he called me and he said, I'll give you $50 million. Give me a few years. So I think
really
sometimes,
if you don't ask, right?
And I think,
because
but what a cool thing, like their whole family is involved. All the properties are involved. His family has now been to Africa with us twice. They're checking in on their projects. Like it's a really cool legacy that they're building, and they're impacting, if you were to meet 1 million people who you gave clean water and they were all lined up into the distance, and you spent 1 minute just consecutively, and they said, hey, Todd, let me just tell you how water changed my life. And then a minute later, you moved on to the next one. If you never took a break, you didn't sleep, you didn't eat, you didn't have to use the restroom, it would take you almost 2 years to get through that line of the 1 million people that you helped 1 minute at a time. So it's an extraordinary legacy. And I think sometimes, we don't challenge donors enough. But we know exactly what we're doing, and we know that they're at 171,312 people as of today, or what that number is. So there's an ultimate transparency as he moves from person one with his family to the millionth life. And we can prove that, and we can prove for every dollar. So there's kind of the vision, and then there's the 90-page proposal that needs to be able to back up the big vision or the big idea.
That's really cool. What else is getting you excited about?
I don't know. We can also ask.
I know. I feel like I want to let.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the question is, how do you manage corruption in these countries? Let me kind of start by just the matrix of how we work. So we know where 700 million people live without water. That's an agreed upon data set. 80% of them live in rural areas, and 20% live in cities and towns. We don't work in the urban and peri-urban. So we've kind of taken the 80% from day one. Most of the government funding, as they have it, goes first to the urban areas. It's where the voters live. It's easier to build big infrastructure systems, and it's the rural people that get left behind. So that's kind of our first pass, is rural. Then we actually eliminate conflict zones. So we're not in South Sudan. We're not in Somalia. We are not in areas of active conflict, because we're hoping for 10 plus years of sustainability with the projects. There are people in those zones, we just haven't gotten there yet, and we haven't developed that proficiency. So that's kind of the next pass. If there's a war going on, we're not working there. Another pass is the corruption index. Do we believe we can get our materials into a country and can do the work in a transparent way? That eliminates a bunch of countries, and it's had us withdraw from countries after experiencing that, Haiti being one example. We just couldn't get materials through the port without corruption. Then there's about 60 countries left that would meet that criteria. and we start at the bottom of the UN Poverty Index, and we just start working up. So we'd be in Malawi and not Peru or Bolivia, which would be much wealthier than a Malawi, or a Cambodia and not Brazil, which would have a much smaller population. And then it's systems and it's controls and it's audits, it's quality checks. You know, we have a team that's dedicated to doing that, flying around, both an in-house function at Charity Water of about 25 people, that's all they do, and then also the use of external contractors to go and conduct audits. We do find stuff, and we put partners on probation. We move money from one program to another one that's succeeding. We've also found remediation. I mean, you know, we know if somebody steals a $65 of gas, you know, or they forged a receipt. So it's even down to that level of detail often. And it's something that you're constantly, you know, mitigating against. I think what surprised us is it is not one of our biggest challenges. The biggest challenge, I would say, is well-intentioned work done poorly. It's a bad batch of PVC that came in from China that cracked when you put it in the ground. It's solar panels that are malfunctioning. It's a team that drilled some wells crookedly because they weren't properly trained on the equipment. So there's that whole side of the business too. It is difficult to work in these operating environments, and you know, the longer you do it, the more you develop a proficiency, as in with anything. You know, so we're 20 years in. You know, the dollar in today, I believe, would be the most effective use of the dollar across the 20-some countries at any point in our previous history. Dollar in year one, you know, we were still working it out. We had some great programs and partners who were with us 20 years later, and we had some that we would never give that dollar to today, just based on their performance.
Scott, how long does it take you to get into a new country? Let's say someone says, I'm willing to provide the money to bring you into Madagascar.
Yeah, so $10 million as a commitment will get us to open up a new country, and it takes about 18 months, 12 to 18 months for the site visits, the vetting. You know, we'll start with a smaller tranche of money, see how they do that, and then would deploy the donor dollars. And we've had people do that, and we're actually in Madagascar.
Okay.
And that's donor-driven, Madagascar. A family who lives on an island and wanted to help another island,
And you're in
poorest island in the world.
You're in Africa, Asia, India. What are the countries that you're in, or the main?
We've worked in 29.
continents?
East and West Africa. You know, so 2/3 of the people on Earth without clean water do live in Africa, and India's made a lot of progress. Southeast Asia's made a lot of progress. Central and South America have made a lot of progress. Rob and I had breakfast this morning, and we were trading stats of, like, you know, sometimes people say, what are the governments in Africa doing about this? I was at a dinner last night, and I shared that Uganda, where we've worked, we've helped 2.1 million people get water in Uganda. Uganda's total GDP for a country of 60 million people is less than half of the state of Florida. So the state of Florida's budget is 2x a country of 60 million people. Rwanda, great country of development, a lot of progress. The total GDP is less than New York City public school district system. The budget for New York City schools is greater than a country. So we are seeing these countries lean in and invest in conservation, in water, in roads. 95% of the people in Rwanda are subsistence farmers, so there's not that tax base. And we're also looking for ways to get the government to match private donations, which is a great story for our donors, and we're seeing some success with that as well.
Great. Any other questions from the
We have
audience?
4 minutes left. We'll take any questions. Yeah, what does my time look like now? I mean, in years one, everybody's a generalist. I mean, you're dropping off the check at the bank and taking the donor meeting and jumping on the plane to go meet a new partner in Zambia and vet. So, you know, as the organization builds out, all of these skills become specialized and professionalized. I hired a president a year and a half ago, an amazing woman who was running International Justice Mission. She was there for 15 years. And I now am really focused on two things: raising money and the storytelling around that. So raising money both in the story for the masses and also high net worth donors and foundations, and then innovation. How do we continue to innovate? What are the products? The world is changing so fast. The things that we used to do just don't work anymore. So what does charity water look like in a world of AI? I mean, I'll give you one example. We were the first charity to get 1 million Twitter followers. And we used to just tweet and everybody would see it. It was great. We raised tens of millions of dollars. We were the first charity to use Instagram. We would post on Instagram and all of our people would see it. Now maybe 1% will see it organically, unless you're paying Meta, unless you're paying X. So the whole landscape has changed, and so I'm trying to spend my time thinking about, how does the organization get ahead of that? We just built a retail experience. So we built a huge analog immersive experience just outside of Nashville, which is, kind of like Van Gogh immersive or Color Factory or Meow Wolf, if you've been to any of these, around water. So we bring people in, and there's holographic images, there's a Dolby theater, there's a 100-degree room where you walk on a treadmill carrying 40 pounds of water, following a 12-year-old as she tells you her story. There's a VR area where you put on a headset and you're transported to the moment when they strike water, and 300 people are dancing and cheering. And then we lead you to the Give Shop to see how you want to contribute. And we're converting 53% of the people to give on the spot. So that's very different than tweeting or posting on Instagram. And it's kids, it's families. We had an 11-year-old kid leave with a little piggy bank that we give out. And 2 months later, he tells his parents, I'm going to raise 10 grand. And his parents like, it's ambitious. Why don't you raise $250 for a family? Well, a couple months later, he comes back with $10,000 of cash that he's collected going door to door. So, that's one kind of experimental innovation. It costs us about $2 million to build. We've already raised just shy of $3 million in less than a year. I don't know that we can scale these units, but that's what I'm spending time thinking about. It's kind of the next chapter. Yeah, many of those conversations do not go well with donors. That's for every story like that, there's 50 where they're like, yeah, I'm good with $1 million. Dollars, not people. I think, you just have to get used to hearing no a lot. You're making an ask, and I think I was bad at asking for the first 10 years. I was shy at asking, so you do have to get bold about the ask and put yourself out there. And you're going to hear yes, no, less, or they're going to ghost you, which happens a lot, and just ignore you. And that's kind of the worst. We were talking about this. I love working with Gen 1 Wealth, the entrepreneur, the person who created the wealth, because they make decisions quickly. They have built their empire or made their money on their ability to trust their gut and their instinct when it comes to people, very quickly assess something and then say yes or no and be decisive.
And they might have more authority. The next gen may have to get buy-in from their siblings.
So I would say almost all of those crazy instant yeses was an entrepreneur, was the person who made the money and says, I will give my money how I want, when I want, without the layers of, let's have an 18-month grant process, in a middle layer of management.
Scott, we're going to have to wrap up, but where can people follow up with you to learn more about Charity Water and support?
I'll be around, charitywater.org, and we'd love to connect if you have any ideas for us. And if you know anybody I should be talking to about giving 1 million people clean water, I'm all ears. Scott@charitywater.org. And we all have our initial emails.
Scott Harrison, the Bono of charity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.